1. This story took place 4 years ago at the end of 2016. I was 14 years old at the time and had just moved to a new country with my family. I was not so fond of the idea of moving and leaving my good friends, but I did not have a choice either. I also just had my first boyfriend and we needed to break up because of this, so you can imagine I was quite upset. My dad had gotten a job offer at a university, so for the first few weeks we lived on campus until we found our own place. On campus there were mostly dorm buildings and a few little houses for guests, which is where we stayed. It was quite an outdated house. It looked as if it was not renovated since the 80s, which already creeped me out a bit. Not to mention, it was a one-story house with big windows overlooking the campus, and people could walk right by our house and look in. There was no fence around the house, which just felt more vulnerable to creepy intruders to come in. Maybe I should point out that this was quite a hard move for me, which led me to be depressed for a few months. My parents knew this, and therefore they let me choose which bedroom would be mine before my brother got to pick. The house had a long hallway which contained 4 bedrooms at the very end. I didn't really like any of them, and we played with the idea of the office at the front of the house being my bedroom. After some adjustments and moving furniture around, we made the office my bedroom. I need to explain the structure of the room in detail for the rest of the story to make sense. The wall in the front of the door was a big floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the dorm buildings. I always had the curtains shut and the windows locked for safety. To the right of the door was where my bed was placed along the wall, and facing my bed was a library wall. It was kind of a built-in shelf unit for the whole wall. In front of the shelves, I put my desk and couch beside it. The door also had a lock, one of those push-button locks from the inside, and a key lock from the outside, kind of like a bathroom lock. I would never lock it, though, as my parents knew not to come in. A few weeks went by and nothing changed. I rarely left my room or bed because of my depression. I was mad at my parents for moving, so I did not speak to them often, which made the distance between our bedrooms that much more enjoyable. I would stay up much later than the rest of my family watching Netflix in bed. One night, as usual, I was in bed watching Netflix. My room was completely dark, and the only light source being my computer. It was around midnight, but I was not tired and planned to watch a few more episodes of my show before actually going to sleep. A little later, I got this weird, uncomfortable feeling throughout my whole body. I was not sure what it was, but something did not feel right. I felt almost as if I was being watched by something or someone. I started getting a bit paranoid when the feeling got stronger and stronger within me. I try to act like nothing is happening, staying still in bed. I look at my door and hear the button being pushed to lock the door. I kind of started freaking out because I have never had delusions before. I could swear that something or someone has locked me in the room from the inside, meaning I could not be alone in my room. I started sweating nervously and felt my heart beating out of my chest. I nervously looked away from my computer to my couch, and what I saw next would haunt me forever. In front of me, sitting on the couch, was a black figure. It wasn't a person, but it had all the features of one. I could not see his face or any details. It just sat there, and I could see his shoulders and head covering the shelves behind him. He was abnormally tall, maybe 7 feet tall, and his upper body covered a lot of the shelves behind him. I'm certain it was a paranormal interaction, as he wasn't completely human. But he also wasn't completely non-human. I could feel his eyes staring at me, but he did not have any physical eyes. The Shadow Man didn't move. He didn't do anything except stare at me constantly. I wanted to scream for help, but my body felt frozen, and I was scared that maybe this Shadow Man would do something to me. I tried to ignore him and kept watching my TV show, but it was too hard to ignore. I could see him from the corner of my eye, sitting there, staring at me. Although he did not move, his presence was very much there, and I could feel that I was not alone. The feeling grew more and more intense. With the door being locked, I was scared to move or do anything, and just wanted the shadow to go away. About 40 minutes later, the sense of uncomfortableness left my body, and I was relieved to look at my couch and it was completely empty. The Shadow Man was gone. I closed my laptop and tried to fall asleep to forget this ever happened. The next day I told my parents what happened the night before. They did not believe me, but I don't blame them. Most people I tell this story to don't believe me either, but I know what I had encountered that night was not in my imagination, and the sense of uncomfortableness I had in my body that night was real, and the sight of the Shadow Man was the scariest thing that had ever happened to me. Ever since that night, 4 years ago, I can't fall asleep with my room being completely dark. I always have a small nightlight. Laugh if you want, but it is seriously the only thing that gets me through the night, in case the Shadow Man plans to make a second visit. 2. This was on March 25th to 26th, 2016. I was in 8th grade, 14 years old. I know this exact date because I was terrified after the fact and disassociated all day on March 26th. Me and my family also went to Yosemite on the 26th, so I have pictures from the day after. On March 25th, I attended a sleepover at my friend's house. Buffy. She lived about a 3 to 5 minute walk away from me. There were 3 other girls there. Glinda, Maharat, and Makari. Bee's mother and father and sister were home all day, but she had an older brother who partied, so he would come home late at night. She had 2 dogs that were not allowed in the house and only stayed outside in the backyard. Buffy's room and her sister's room were connected by a bathroom 2 doors opposite to each other. It was kind of like a hallway that happened to be a bathroom. For some reason, the main door to Buffy's room was missing, as was her sister's main door to her bedroom. I think it was because their dad was paranoid about having boys over. The doors connecting their rooms were also missing. Don't worry, only the sinks were exposed. The toilet and shower were behind another door in the bathroom that was not missing. This is important later on. It was great. I had fun, we talked our heads off, teenage girl stuff. Eventually the topic of the paranormal came up, specifically the spirit of Buffy's dead grandfather. Her family was Catholic, Mexican, very firm in their beliefs. They were convinced that he was their guardian angel. I feel like there were more stories of him, but I specifically remember 2 only. The first is one I remember clearest. Buffy said that her mom was driving down a stretch of road. It was a cloudy day, but for some reason a ray of sunlight followed her mom's car. You know how it looks like the moon is following you in the car? That's how it felt. And the clouds were parted to shine this sun ray down on the car. It followed her all the way home, and she is convinced that it was the grandfather protecting her while she drove. The second is a bit hazy. I remember she said her mother felt a presence in their laundry room, but I can't remember if she saw or heard anything. She is also convinced that this was the grandfather. I kind of shrugged it off for the most part. The conversation moved on anyway. That doesn't mean I wasn't intrigued. I've always been interested in ghosts, monsters, and cryptids. I was obsessed with vampires and ghosts when I was little, even though I've always been terrified of spirits. I had to stop watching Ghost Adventures because it was getting hard for me to sleep at night. I was a bit skeptical of her stories. Having been raised agnostic with a staunch atheist father, I wasn't scared of the stories, but I still kept them in mind. When we went to bed, we slept in a line on the floor of Buffy's bedroom, shoulder to shoulder. I went to sleep fine. At some point her brother came home, most likely drunk. He went straight to bed. His room was downstairs at the end of the hallway under the staircase. The staircase is right outside her room. Suddenly I woke up sweating bullets. I had no idea what time it was. It was like I blinked and I woke up. So I know I slept at least a little bit. The other girls were dead asleep, as was the rest of her family. I laid awake for a little bit, trying to go back to sleep. Then I heard 3 knocks. Their cadence was strange. It was an equal amount of time in between each knock, but it was too slow to be someone knocking on a door, and too fast to be more than a second long. I'd say there was a half-second silence in between each knock. I assumed it was Buffy's brother and closed my eyes again. Then 3 more knocks. I wondered if someone was at the front door, but it would be unusual for a guest so late at night in a safe suburban neighborhood. I was a bit creeped out, then was really creeped out when the knocks started up again. I realized they were coming from something that sounded wooden. The floor in her house, including her room, was hardwood. It kind of sounded like it could be coming from downstairs, which would have been easy to hear since my head was on the floor. The thought that it was coming from Buffy's bedroom door was terrifying. I felt like I laid there for hours awake, listening to these knocks, but I know that would be illogical. I estimate that this went on for about 10 to 20 minutes. I was scared out of my mind. I woke the other girls up, panicked. They were all super groggy and not really awake at all as I was telling them what happened. There were no knocks when they were awake. I told them I was scared. Glinda just looked out the window, said, "It's dark outside." They went right back to sleep. The other girls didn't really seem to care either, and they all went back to sleep. I never felt more helpless or alone in my life. I contemplated texting my mom, but I was too scared to move. The knocking stopped, if I remember correctly, but then the clicking started. It sounded like someone clicking open a pen. Just once. It started directly above us, then I heard it again, and it sounded like it came from Buffy and her sister's bathroom. Then I heard it again, coming from her sister's room. Then again in the bathroom, then again above us. The sound was traveling back and forth between the rooms. I was too scared to remember how many times this occurred, but I do remember the clicking wasn't immediately one after the other. There was maybe a second or two delay between each click, all following the pattern. The strange thing about it is that I didn't dare look at it, but I always associate the image of a pinprick of blue light flashing with each click. At some point I passed out, and suddenly it was morning. I felt drained and irritable all day, like I wasn't really fully conscious. I felt like I wasn't really all there. I later looked up how I was feeling, and the best way I could describe it is that I was disassociating, most likely due to how afraid I was during the night. It was strange disassociating in Yosemite. I didn't really want to appreciate it when I felt that crappy. I told my parents about it, and they said there was probably an explanation. I never really discussed it with anyone else until now, but from time to time, I remember my experience and how terrified I felt. I never felt that afraid of anything before or since. It was mind-boggling. I know it wasn't sleep paralysis. I have never experienced sleep paralysis before or after this incident. I could move and speak and was fully lucid due to the amount of fear I felt, and I always thought my friends not listening to me was pretty weird. And even after that, I still heard things. I know I wasn't hallucinating. What do you think? 3. I was 14 at the time of this experience. I'm 23 now, and while I can remember this event as clearly as if it happened yesterday, I'm not sure what it means. I've never been afraid of ghosts and spirits, just cautiously curious. Though I would never experiment with a spirit board myself for fear of doing something wrong, I do think it's fascinating. I've always believed in the paranormal, but I hadn't actually experienced anything. Not yet. My mother was a complicated woman. She made a lot of bad decisions and didn't always do what was best for our family, but I know she loved me. She did a lot of shit that caused me a lot of pain and trauma, but it was nothing malicious. She just... I don't know. Drugs can fuck up a brain, I guess. And being in and out of jail for 10 years, she finally went to rehab. She was in there for 6 months, got out in September of 2010, and she was promptly diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in March of 2011. She died on September 22nd, 2011. And I turned 14 4 days later. 6 days after my birthday, I had my experience. She died in our living room on a hospital bed that the hospice had installed in the middle of the room. Obviously, that isn't exactly my favorite room to be in anymore, but shortly after she died, I kept finding myself in there. I don't know why, I would just kind of wander in for no reason, like something was pulling me in there. I was home after telling my dad I wasn't feeling up for school that day. He went ahead to work and told me to call him if I needed him. It was about 7 a.m. at this point. and I wasn't able to go back to sleep after he left, so naturally, I found myself back in the living room. I don't know how long I sat there on the couch, staring at the spot where her hospital bed had been, thinking of the time she'd forgotten my name or needed me to help her to the bathroom. I hated that room, but I couldn't leave it. Eventually, I lay down on the couch and my cat Flame joined me for a nap. I was just drifting off when I heard something. And to this day, I'm still not sure what the hell it was. It was a sound I could only describe as raining glass somewhere in my house. I know it could have been the beginnings of a dream or something, but once I sat up, the noise continued for maybe 5 seconds. I could tell Flame heard it too, the fur on her spine sticking straight up and her tail fluffed out like a bottle brush. I had 2 other cats in the house, so, of course, I thought one of them had knocked over a shelf or gotten too confident in a jump. I put on some shoes in case of shattered glass and checked every room, and nothing. Everything was in place. Every glass in the kitchen was still in the cabinet. Every figurine in my dad's den was perfectly fine. Every picture frame still right where they'd always been. I sat back down on the couch, thoroughly confused. The living room suddenly felt unnaturally cold. And yes, this was in October, but I live in Texas, and we have a Dearborn glass heater that had been on low that day. In the living room. The room felt drastically different than it had not 10 minutes ago. I grabbed Flame and left the living room and headed to my own room. I called my dad and explained what had happened, and he chalked it up to a nightmare, or I was hearing something outside. I've read that cats can sense paranormal or supernatural occurrences, and the fact that Flame had reacted to the noise as well rubs me the wrong way. I feel like my mother tried to contact me that day. I don't know why she did it by using such a troubling noise, but it certainly caught my attention, and every time I look at a picture of her, I think back to that day and the terrible noise I heard. I wish I could accurately convey just how piercing it was to hear, but it made my heart drop, and it isn't a noise I've heard since or want to hear again. But there isn't a day that I don't think about it. 4. I'm from California, and way back when I was on the college search, I realized that I'd likely go out to the East Coast if I wanted to play field hockey. My mom and I organized a road trip through Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island to hit a bunch of different schools in a short amount of time. One of the schools was Ithaca College. It was a last-minute decision to stop there, so we didn't have much time to explore the general area afterwards. We had been told by multiple people that the waterfalls in the area were beyond gorgeous and worth the stop, so my mom and I decided to swing by one before we left for Pennsylvania. We put Ithaca Falls in our rental car GPS, and it brought us to this red curb loop and an old run-down overlook of the falls. This overlook was down a hill and through some trees, so my mom didn't want to leave the car on a red curb. She encouraged me to go down and check it out on my own, and I did. The first time I went down, I was sure to be observant of everything around me. Didn't want any randos in the woods sneaking up on me. I went to the ledge and took some pics, sat and listened to the water for a while, then turned to go back up. When I turned, I got this odd feeling as if someone was watching me or standing with me. I got uncomfortable and looked around. Nothing appeared to be wrong, so I calmly headed back up the hill, got in the car, showed my mom the photos, and realized I didn't take a video. My mom suggests I go back down to get a video. We've got time. So again I do. Second time I go down, I feel a little less happy. I was down a slope so my mom couldn't see me. I felt more alone and exposed than the time before, and that sinking feeling kept growing. I got to the edge, take the video with shaking hands. Now I'm feeling like I need to get out of there. Intense sense of urgency. I turn around to go back up, and some force stops me dead in my tracks. I'm frozen there like a rabbit or a deer frozen in headlights. I literally cannot get myself to move forward or take a step. An absolutely overwhelming sense of dread sweeps over my body and presses on my chest. Just such dread. I literally feel like I'm going to die. I still can't move and sit there terrified as I feel a massive presence come up behind me. This thing felt big and so real, and yet I can't get away. I'm still stuck and helpless. I keep standing there, too scared to turn around, unable to move. When the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, it bends down towards me, and right next to my ear says, "You." I kid you not, when I heard that, I ran faster than I have my entire life. I tore up that hill, still too afraid to see what was behind me. I got in the car, slammed the door, and like a movie went, "Drive!" My mom looks at me in disbelief and goes, "Is everything okay?" I say, "Just drive!" She told me later that I was pale white, and that the sense of urgency in my voice just told her she had to get away from whatever I was scared of. What spooks me so much about this story is that I never turned around. It felt so real that it could have been a person, but I was right against the overlook. I don't think anyone could have snuck up behind me. And I've also gotten that sense of dread visiting other haunted places. I really feel that it was something paranormal. As for the yoo-hoo, it didn't sound male or female. It did sound mean, however, as if it was trying to scare me or intimidate me. I've had a few paranormal experiences, but this one certainly takes the cake for scariest. Hope all of you enjoy, and would love to hear your thoughts as to what it was. 5. I have had a lot of paranormal experiences, but the shared experiences always stick out for me because another human being can verify my experience, and therefore lend credibility to it. I am a skeptic even of my own encounters, and it's reassuring to know that I am not, in fact, insane. This is the story of my first shared experience. My friend Nicole had asked me to join her for a drive into the city, because she had to adjust her health insurance at their main office, and didn't want to go alone. I agreed. It was an uneventful drive. Note we're both in our early 20s already. We parked down the street from the office, which is on kind of an elevated street, and the spot where we parked was technically an overpass. She wasn't able to get to talk to someone, but we'd driven out of our way and decided not to waste it. The area where we were had some high-end shopping, and we decided to look around. After window shopping for a while, we took a walk, just planning to go a couple blocks, make a loop, and eventually go back to the car. We were maybe 5 blocks into our walk when we passed this tall, 10-story or so apartment building. I was suddenly filled with dread and so overwhelmed that I started crying. I felt like something awful was happening, or had, or was about to. I wanted to go into this building and stop whatever it was. Nicole basically forbade me from going in, stating that, "If it is this bad on the outside, what will it be like when you go in there?" With a last glance at the building, noting the Chinese lanterns hanging in the top-floor windows, we left. As soon as we were out of eyesight, the feeling subsided. When we returned to the car, we discovered that we had a direct line of sight to the dreaded apartment building, and by the time we got to the car, it was dim out and the Chinese lanterns were on, giving the windows a sinister red glow. We drove home, probably exceeding the speed limit by a lot. When we arrived at her house, we went to her room and sat on the bed, prompted by the odd events of the day. She told me about the dread she feels when she takes a shower, and asked if I'd check it out. I observed no faulty wiring or anything that would obviously lend to high EMF. Remember, I'm a skeptic, and yes, I did check. I stepped into the shower and shut my eyes. I instantly felt claustrophobic, as though the room shrunk when I shut my eyes. I didn't even have the shower curtain shut. I felt someone or something lean in towards my face, and I hear it whisper, "God's not here." I'm not a religious person, but I was thoroughly unnerved. We decided to stop talking about creepy stuff and watch a comedy. So, sitting there in her bed, we watched some funny movies for a few hours and felt much better. It started raining outside, and I turned to look out the window. In the reflection of the room, I saw a man, or a very masculine-looking person, stand up in the doorway, as though he'd been sitting and stood when I saw him. I whipped around to look, and there was nothing there. Searched the house, and saw nothing. No sooner had I come back to the bedroom than both of us observed the lights dim, and a black mass started to come out of the floor. Not a mist or shadow, but as though white noise on a TV was black and had taken form and was emerging out of the ground. It lasted about 20 seconds and then stopped. Driving to work the next morning alone, I turned around a bend in the road and slammed on my brakes because there was a guy in the road. I knew I hit him because there was no way I stopped in time. I threw my truck in park, got out, and went around to the front. Nothing. Got on my hands and knees, looked under the car. Nothing. I checked and double-checked and triple-checked. After I hit the person in the road, the series of events ended. Nicole and I still talk about this day a lot and don't have an explanation for it. Neither of us have lost a loved one that matches these events or know of any reason why an entity would follow us from that building. We were clean and sober the entire time, and neither of us experienced delusions of a medical or psychological nature. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 212. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Also, an announcement I meant to make in yesterday's video, but I'll do it in this one, since there's a lot of crossover between the listener base for those two. Yesterday's glitch video, there will be one more this year, at the end of November. That's the end of the month they go out, by the way. Always the end of the month, last Thursday of the month. But there won't be one in December, because the glitch week would be the end of the month, as I said. And I like to take things easy towards the end of the month in December. So we will have videos, just the regular ones, because the glitch videos take a lot of doing, because it's basically the length of 4 videos in a week, as opposed to the usual 6. Oh, the usual 7 rather. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.